Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Power Hungry Podcast. I'm Robert Bryce. On this podcast, we talk about energy, power, innovation, and politics. And I'm pleased to welcome back for her second appearance, second appearance on the Power Hungry Podcast, my friend Lisa Linowes. She was last on the podcast on April 25th of 2022. Lisa, welcome back to the Power Hungry Podcast.
Thank you, Robert. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Lisa, before we go further, guests on this podcast introduce themselves. So I warned you about that, and you've been on the podcast before. So please introduce yourself.
Thank you. So, well, actually, what I've done for the last nearly 20 years of my life is engage in the debate over wind energy and the issues around developing industrial scale wind energy. As part of that, I spent a lot of time analyzing the policies that are driving it and assisting communities in understanding what impacts are related to it. So that's what I do.
But today we're going to talk about the report that you did for the Fiscal Alliance Foundation.
Yes.
And by the way, I'm going to just repeat you since you didn't mention it. You're based in New Hampshire, Lyman, New Hampshire, if I recall.
That is correct.
You have a business degree, a business background. You're the founder and executive director of Wind Action, windaction.org. We're going to talk about your report called High Impact, How Massachusetts Energy Policy is Raising Electricity Rates, which you wrote for the Fiscal Alliance Foundation. So I'm finishing your bio here, if you don't mind.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm very interested in this issue of electricity prices because, as we've discussed and is well known, very few people understand how much they pay for electricity, but they don't understand how to read their electric bill. They know exactly and can tell you within a few cents how much they paid for gasoline the last time because they see that price, right? And they sit in there and they sit for 2 or 3 minutes filling their car, so they remember that price. They don't know how much they're paying for electricity, but New England has some of the highest electricity rates in America, and you particularly focused on Massachusetts. So let's talk about that. What did you find in this report, particularly as it relates to Massachusetts, which I know that, I looked at these prices just recently, but the New England states are vie with California for the most expensive electricity in America. You say these high prices in New England are directly related to or correlate very closely with renewable energy mandates. Tell us about that, please.
Absolutely right. And actually, the genesis of this report dates back probably about maybe 2019 timeframe when the ISO New England had put out a graph. And I found this fascinating. What the graph showed was from 2008 through to, I forget the year at that point, but it would have been 2019, 2020 maybe, where they were showing what it cost to operate the full grid system. That is all the components associated with wholesale energy prices, transmission, and all the various markets, capacity markets and others that were going into the cost of the energy and transmission side of your electric bill. And then
so to be clear, I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying. I'm sorry to interrupt, but you're saying, so this is just operating the grid. This is not about the generation side of things. This is just keeping the electricity flowing, the transmission and distribution part of the story.
No, actually, it included the wholesale energy price as well.
Oh, okay.
The energy market side of it.
Okay. Thank you.
And then, but what it showed then was that there was a certain cost associated with running the grid and delivering and energy and the cost of energy. So the actual megawatt hours of energy, whether it was coming from an import or from an in-region power plant. And then it compared that to the residential retail rates that people pay in their electric bill, the all-in price. So that therein is energy, transmission, distribution, system benefits charge, taxes, all that you add into your electric bill, the final cost that the ratepayer pays residentially. And the delta on those two numbers was enormous. I mean, I have the chart right in front of me here. It's like for 2020, it was, let's say for Connecticut, the price to run the grid was 6.7 cents a kilowatt hour, but the Connecticut residential retail rate was 22.44 cents a kilowatt hour. That delta was enormous. And so what we started looking into is trying to understand better what I and a colleague of mine tried to understand what was making up that big difference Part of it is the distribution system, which obviously that is the portion that is owned by the utilities for managing the grid system, the parts, those lines that run in front of your home, and other components of actually delivering the energy from the grid to your home. But the other part of it, which is significant, had to do with all of the mandates that have been imposed on the ratepayers. And Massachusetts in particular, it has an enormous number of different programs associated with climate policies and associated with renewable energy. And one other thing about that is that slide, as far as I know, that the ISO New England put together was not widely distributed. It may have gone to people within that were stakeholders in the New England Power Pool, which is, a group of that's made up of people that track and work within the grid system, the generators and other stakeholders. But they actually put that graph in a document that the ISO New England puts out called their regional system plan. And in there, and that was when I saw it, it was actually the 2021 document. And in there, they actually state that the delta, much of that delta between the price of running the grid, including the energy costs, and the price that people pay from their homes, that is by and large made up of these policies, state policies.
Well, so, this is interesting because for a lot of reasons, right? That it follows on what Meredith Angwin, who is another New Englander, she lives in Vermont, but the people don't understand how the grid operates. They don't understand why it costs what it costs. They don't understand why they pay what they pay. And as I've watched what's happened in New England, it seems like after reading your report, which is available, by the way, on the Fiscal Alliance Foundation.org, that these increasing rates are due to the renewable energy mandates and also the inability of gas marketers to build more pipeline capacity into New England to bring in more gas to allow more gas-fired generation, lower cost gas from Pennsylvania. I know you were focused more on the renewable mandates, but how important is that lack of gas?
That's essential. And I appreciate it. I debated whether or not I should put the information in about the gas pipelines, because that's all part of the policy as well. I mean, the fight to allow for additional pipelines into New England is staggering, our ability to get those built. Effectively, what we're ending up doing is building transmission to deliver generation from other parts of from Canada and from New York, because we can't get the pipelines built. But that is a big part of it. And that huge run up we had in 2022, where I'm paying literally 22, it should be moderating this year, but I was literally paying 22 cents a kilowatt hour for just the energy component in my electricity bill. In Massachusetts, it was up around 31 cents a kilowatt hour for the energy only component. And that was by and large because of gas, our inability to get gas delivered into New England.
And part of that gas that is now being delivered into New England, and I haven't looked at this lately, but it's coming through the LNG import facility in Boston Harbor, which, I mean, is truly incredible that you have the Marcellus Shale, which is the biggest gas producing region. Well, I don't know. Look at the Permian numbers lately. The Permian numbers have been going up, but staggering amounts of gas coming out of the Marcellus Shale in Pennsylvania, but you can't build a pipeline across New England. And if you can't do that, you can't get the gas you can't build a pipeline across New York to get it into New England. So New England is gas poor, despite being within, I'll say spitting distance, not quite spitting distance, of one of the biggest gas reservoirs in the world. I mean, it's truly remarkable. But tell me, go ahead.
And there was one other component of that, which is very frustrating. As you know, Indian Point, if you were following that closely, the nuclear power plant that was decommissioned. That
and wrongly shuttered, I will add, because it still sticks in my craw, that the Natural Resources Defense Council under Andrew Cuomo prematurely shuttered that plant, which was cheered on by Riverkeeper, and they claimed that, it's going to be replaced by renewables and efficiency, and it hasn't. And in fact, it's been replaced. The output from Indian Point, 16 terawatt hours a year, roughly, has been replaced by gas-fired generation, and CO2 emissions in New York have gone up. Electricity prices in New York have gone up because of those bastards who I hope rot in hell for what they did, because that was a absolutely sinful move, what they did. And I will not forget, and I will not forgive. So I'm sorry. I just had to interject that because I went to Indian Point. It was a marvel of technology, should never have been shut down. Anyway,
I'm totally with you. You said it much better than I would have been able to. The only point I wanted to make was there has to have been a part of a contributing factor to our difficulty in getting natural gas as well. I mean, another straw in the pipe that's in the pipeline that is drawing gas that would come here, I believe. Otherwise, I have nothing to absolutely confirm that. But you put another draw in New York, it's going to go there first.
Right. So there's less gas available to move into the states that are further north. I want to go back to your report. And again, the name of the report is High Impact, How Massachusetts Energy Policy is Raising Electricity Rates. And you primarily focus on Massachusetts, but you also talk about New England. But I want to read this part. You said the annual cost of Massachusetts renewable energy policies has quadrupled in 10 years, from 250 million in 2011 to 1 billion in 2020. So I want to repeat this. So just the renewable mandates are now in 2020, which is now 3 years ago, are costing Massachusetts ratepayers $1 billion a year.
Absolutely. And it is higher this year than it was last year, and higher last year than the year before. The only reason I stopped at 2020 was because that's the soonest available data we have from Massachusetts. And that's another frustration. I mean, the ability to get information and the lack of transparency, in this case, because of pure delays in being able to put those documents out, is inexcusable. And so we have a document that now that's old data, really, because the mandates they go up every year. And
I want to thank you and then I want to remember, just to reiterate here, you continued, you said cumulatively, this has cost Massachusetts ratepayers roughly $6 billion in increased electricity prices in that period. That's 2011 to 2020. So I wrote down the question I had here. So how did you get that figure? You said it's hard to get the data, but how do you do that calculation?
Yeah, well, and what the difficulty in getting it is that the state is not releasing it. So all of this, what we're talking about here is there are 26 separate programs in all of New England. So each state has a different set of renewable portfolio standards. Each RPS, if you will, is a program that mandates a certain technology, a certain amount of electricity to come and be sold retail into the state that comes from a certain technology. So what we call class 1 resources would be wind and some hydro, some biomass, some solar, and then we have various other policies or programs. Right. So what is happening? So those numbers the utility is required to buy certainly the renewable energy credits associated with that, so that they basically to prove that they're selling that energy to their customers in whatever state it is. And if you are a utility that sells in all 6 states, then you have to abide by all 26 programs. And ultimately, it comes to a certain percentage of all your electricity coming from renewables. It's just specific. Again, when I use the word renewables, it has to be very clear. We all think of renewables in terms of wind and solar and maybe hydro and other biomass and other forms of generation, landfill gas. But the renewables that are needed to buy are those that are established in statute or by rule. So they're and
so let's talk about that, because one of the things, and I think you helped me discover this, and we've never met in person, by the way, and we've talked many years, but now going back, I guess, since I started tracking this, the reactions or the rejections of renewables back in 2010, and I think we've probably been chatted maybe since then, I don't know, 8 or 10 years ago. But one of the things you pointed out to me was that these RECs, these renewable energy certificates or credits, that there's a wind project in New York that is in Western New York, but it's actually the wind output is being claimed by utilities in Massachusetts. So this is tell me about the bookkeeping here, right? Because there's a ledger domain here in terms of these renewables and how they're being accounted for and what counts as a REC and how these utilities are complying with this thicket of regulations. Can you explain how that works? Because I talked to a utility executive recently who said, this is one of the most corrupt parts of the deal. If you're going to have a renewable energy credit, they should have to use the electricity in the area where they're claiming it. And instead, she pointed out, well, a wind project in Texas, Amazon is claiming it offsets their electricity use somewhere else. Well, that doesn't wash when you're the grid operator, So anyway, I'll stop talking. So how does a REC work?
Yeah. Oh, thank you for that question, because this is where the rubber hits the road. This is where people are most confused, including legislators, which is very frustrating. But here is how the way the system works is that for every megawatt hour of generation comes out of a power plant that is deemed a renewable, again, according to statute or rule, it produces two components. The first component is the energy itself, the electrons that go on the grid. An electron that comes from a wind project is no different than an electron that comes from a gas plant, a coal plant, a nuclear power plant. We can't tell the difference. But there is a separate component, an accounting of that electron that gets recorded, and that's called the renewable energy credit. That is effectively the environmental benefit associated with a megawatt hour of generation that comes from wind or solar or biomass or hydro, depending on the renewable. And it is that component that is used to track whether or not there's compliance with a renewable portfolio standard. So let me give you an example. Here in the state of New Hampshire, we have a program that supports biomass, and that's our RPS dedicated to biomass, wood-based biomass. And in New Hampshire, we consume about 10 million megawatt hours of electricity as a state. So we're very small relative to the other states. I mean, Massachusetts is upwards of 45 million megawatt hours. Connecticut is near there as well. So we're a quarter the size. But our mandate for biomass is 8%. And that means that 800,000 megawatt hours or 800,000 renewable energy credits have to be recorded and recognized as that generation sold to any resident, any business in New Hampshire has to come from that. 8% of it has to come from that biomass technology. And so that when you track the renewable energy credits, that's where the renewability is. Now, we have states like Texas is a perfect example. Well, actually, let me step back from Texas a second, because that's a little bit more complex. We'll talk about New York. So in New York, they also had something like a renewable portfolio standard. But it was slightly different in concept. So they had a number of wind projects that were built over the course from, say, 2005 to 2015, and some after. But leading up to 2015, their mandates were pretty much met. And what they had were contracts. There was a central procurement program where the state was buying those renewable energy credits. And so for under 10-year programs. So any wind project that was in operation had a contract up to 10 years. They were selling their renewable energy credits to the state, and the state of New York could claim that renewability. That wind project was greening up, if you will, the generation that was being sold in New York.
Right.
But once those contracts were no longer in service, they went their full gambit of 10 years. Then those wind projects started selling their generation into New England, taking advantage of or participating in the renewable programs here and eligible for our renewable energy credits. So a utility in New Hampshire, a utility in Massachusetts, or Connecticut could buy that energy in those RECs and claim them as the renewable, as meeting their compliance or meeting their mandate in Connecticut, Massachusetts, or New Hampshire.
Sure.
So it's not
So it's just as you're talking about this, I keep thinking Martin Luther would recognize carbon credits, right? That there's something about this accounting for this, like it's an indulgence somehow, right? Whether you're getting an excuse. And so here's a piece of paper that says, oh no, this is renewable, everything's okay. Or, I'm fine, I'm taking an airplane trip. I was just booking a flight on United. Do you want to offset your carbon credits? Well, the whole thing just seems like a scam of the first order, in that it's like, oh, well, never mind, because there's a wind project in Texas, suddenly your grid is greener. And then no matter how much coal you're burning or how many miles you fly on a 747, right. It's some kind of accounting absolution. Have I missed something here?
Well, now you make a very good point. So in terms of states that have renewable portfolio standards, so we actually have laws on the books that mandate generation come from renewables, again, based on whatever that renewable is by statute. Those, we have no choice around that. So utility has to go and seek out those RECs. And there are, in the case of the New York RECs, there's a requirement as part of the mandate that the energy ultimately be wheeled into New England. So it can't, that energy, those megawatt hours cannot be, technically
they can't come from Texas, is what you're saying.
That is correct.
Right.
That is correct. So the energy is coming from New York. The REC is coming from New York. Where the issue gets confusing is that New York still claims that it's somewhat 2,000 plus megawatts of installed wind is all contributing.
Right, but the RECs are going somewhere else.
Right. So it's not a question of where the power plant is located or even where the physical electrons might be consumed. It's all about where the RECs settle. And the RECs have to settle. They have to be retired. You have to retire those RECs, meaning they're out of commission. You cannot resell them once you've claimed them for your mandate. But to your point, which is actually a truly the metaphor of indulgences, fits here. And that is there's the private market for RECs. So in the case of Iowa or in the case of Texas, both of those states had at one time, and actually, thankfully, this year, Texas removed its RPS from the books. Its RPS went into effect more than a decade ago, and it was almost immediately met. So that I forget what the numbers were, but as soon as the policy was put in place, it had a mandate for a certain percentage. That was met almost immediately with wind. But the RPS still stuck around on the books, and the wind industry fought vigorously to not let it go off the books. I'm not sure why. I mean, my theories on why they were so anxious to keep it there. One of them hoping that they might reopen it and impose further mandates. In any event, all of those RECs that are being produced in Texas go into the private market. So that's where people are buying those RECs, and they're worth very little. When you comparatively, let's say a private market REC out of Texas costs about $1 or $2 a megawatt hour, versus a REC here in New England that costs $40 a megawatt hour. So for years, that until we had this uptick in cost for energy, the REC was more valuable than the energy itself in New England, for the most part. But in Texas, it's just like you just spend $1 and you've pretty much covered your month's worth of, more than a month's worth of electricity.
Right. And it's interesting to see how these big tech companies, how they used to say, oh, well, all of our electricity is renewable now. Right. And now they're being more careful in how they talk about it, saying, oh, we're offsetting our emissions because we're doing this bent down there. And, Amazon's buying all the output of this one wind project. Therefore, even though their data centers aren't necessarily anywhere near the wind project, they're saying, oh, well, this is accounting and because we're doing this.
It's pure marketing in that regard. Pure marketing.
No, and it's greenwashing. Let's be clear. And the marketing, greenwashing. But you also did some.
I'm sorry.
Sure, go ahead.
I just want to say that money that's going to, and I would warn any one of your listeners, do not buy into the private market, because all that's doing is lining the pockets of a wind developer who already has a project operational that is already generating electricity. So it's not even serving as a subsidy for that developer. Here in New England, the argument is that the purpose of the REC is to form a revenue stream to the developer so that he knows, so that when they're putting their finances together in advance of building a project, that they can claim both the energy side of their, whatever energy they sell, but also the REC. That has value. It's a subsidy to the developer.
Okay. Well, but as you say that, Lisa, I'm thinking actually they're triple dipping. Okay, so you get to sell the electricity and you get paid a certain amount for that watt hour, megawatt hour, kilowatt hour. You get to sell the REC, and then you collect either the investment tax credit or the production tax credit, investment tax credit for the solar or offshore wind, and the production tax credit for onshore wind. So they're effectively three different payment streams if you can build a project in New England that could be highly lucrative. Am I missing something?
You are not missing anything. That is exactly right. So if you look at the numbers,
I might get into this business here. I may just decide that I'm going to, let me talk about something else that's in your paper. Again, that's called High Impact, How Massachusetts Energy Policy is Raising Electricity Rates. It was written by Lisa Linowes, who's an energy policy analyst. She's based in Lyman, New Hampshire. And she is a powerhouse and a dedicated and ferocious critic of a lot of the projects and renewable projects that are being built around the country. You have some avoided cost calculations that I thought really caught my eye that in some of these RPS states. For instance, the one that really caught my eye, well, there were two. One in Connecticut, it was Yukon at Avery PT, and I'm not sure what this is, whether it's a battery project, but the avoided cost per ton of CO2 was $485. Another one in 2020 was in Rhode Island. The Pascoag Utility District Battery Storage Project cost $2.3 million. Annual lifetime savings CO2 avoided 1,600, or I'm not sure if it's 800. I think it's 1,600. But the cost per CO2 ton saved $1,438. I mean, this is just ridiculous. I mean, okay, CO2 is bad, but how much are we willing to pay? Oh, $1,000, $1 million? What is the upper limit on trying to get carbon indulgences or avoiding a ton of CO2? I ask this because one of the previous guests on the podcast, he did some, his name is going to come to me here in just a minute, but he did some excellent analyses on cost of CO2 avoided. And he pointed out that the cheapest way to avoid CO2 is to keep nuclear plants operating. But $1,400, how did you find these numbers, these calculations?
So these numbers, so the range of policies that are in effect in New England, so that we have the RPS side of things, and that those policies are designed to encourage the development of new renewables and or maintain existing renewables, so that there are twofold opportunity there. The other side of the coin is the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, or the carbon trade or offset program. And in that case, they are the states. There are 9, or actually I think 10 states at this point. But the New England states, and then Maryland, Delaware, New York. So we're the 9. New Jersey was in there, and then they popped out and they're back again. But what that program is it charges it sells allowances, carbon allowances to the power generators, those that are selling generation within these states. And so it's a state run system where all the states are allocated a certain number of carbon allowances. Those allowances then are sold to the generators, which have to buy them. They have to buy these allowances. And that basically gives them permission to produce a carbon ton in the air. Okay. Right. And so then that money, they call them proceeds. I see it more as a tax, but those proceeds then go back to the states. So that the power plant, the power generator buys the carbon allowance. The money then goes back to the respective states based on how many allowances were sold. They're all auctioned at the same price. And that money then is used predominantly for energy efficiency purposes. So I think 53% is the number roughly that goes to energy efficiency. Other uses of that money are for encouraging more renewable energy development. In that case, we have the battery storage. That was just another program that Rhode Island was looking to put in or wanted to support. So the decision on how that money is spent is all based on what the state wants to do. What someone puts in an application, seeks a grant for the money, and then it's granted. And honestly, those numbers, where they came from is directly from RGGI.org, the Renewable Greenhouse Gas Initiative.org. They actually oversee the auctions that happen, and then they put out a yearly report. And in there, they give this. It's very hard to get this information generally. So I only went through and looked at their annual reports where they give samples of, quote, success stories. These are success stories where they successfully spent RGGI money, and these programs in particular only used RGGI money. And then this is the cost, that ultimately how little carbon savings that is occurring as a result of these programs. So there's a lot of ideology behind these more than any real economics in terms of the state's decisions.
Yeah, I like the way you put it. It's more, so I'll read back to you. What you're saying is more ideological. These projects are ideologically driven, not economically driven. Is that a fair way to think about it?
Absolutely. And, they claim lifetime CO2 tons avoided, lifetime. Okay. In many cases there, I have the lifetime, and in other cases, they give just an annual CO2 tons avoided. I mean, there is a lot of debate as to whether or not the lifetime numbers that are here. First of all, you can't find out how they calculated the lifetime. Okay, we're going to take them at face value.
And in that graph or in that table, so that the annual savings is in the parentheses and the lifetime is the one that's after that. Is that what I'm
right? In that case, I assumed a 20-year lifetime on that. So I just did 20 times two, in that case, 275, which is the first item on in the table,
right,
where they gave a lifetime. There's no explanation. I contacted two of the RGGI coordinators, one in New Hampshire and one in Connecticut, to try and get an answer how they calculated lifetime. Could not get an answer. It might be something buried when the utilities themselves go through an analysis.
But so what you're saying here is this is all just a bunch of assumptions that are based on assumptions that no one has any real idea of what the economics are. And you're talking about, again, this is one of the tables that's in your report. You're referring to the first item, which is a 2014 project in Connecticut, a PV rooftop project, cost $1.5 million, annual lifetime CO2 tons avoided 5,500, annual cost per CO2 ton saved $273. I found it was Reiner Kerr who was on the podcast, and he had done he worked for Stone and Webster. He worked for Shaw Group. He worked for Loomis. He'd spent his whole career in the electric sector, and he did some calculations. I'll read this because this is interesting. It's directly germane to what we're talking about, and I needed to just dig it out. He was on the podcast last October. He wrote, investments in grid-connected solar and wind power generation cost 2 to 6 times the current social cost of carbon policy guideline. Investments in behind-the-meter distributed solar exceed social cost of carbon by a factor of 15. Here's the part that's relevant here about the batteries. Cost of using battery storage to lower carbon emissions by reducing wasted surpluses is about 7 to 19 times the current social cost of carbon guideline, end quote. It brings to mind, I was in Des Moines at an event talking about, it was a conference, and I was a keynote speaker, and one of the other speakers there was from Mid-American, which of course is owned by Berkshire Hathaway, and as Mid-American's a big wind developer in Iowa, and has sued Madison County, Iowa, by the way, try and force the county to take wind turbines they didn't want, but I digress. Mm-hmm. But this fellow said that trying to use battery storage to and renewables, he said, would double the cost of electricity to consumers in the end. I mean, he said that very bluntly, that this is just an incredibly expensive way to provide power to the grid. And this number that you're showing here, $1,400 a ton, just seems exact could very much confirm that.
Yeah, let's say that grid scale batteries it's simply not a viable technology today. I don't know where it will be in 10, 15 years. It's being sold to the public as if it's like, oh, we'll just get rid of nuclear and replace it with battery and wind and solar and everything will be fine. It is shocking really, the cost. But
a lot being deployed here in Texas, and I think it's mostly for short-term storage and also for grid balancing and so on. I want to read as well what you talked about in terms of the land use conflicts, because New England is very constrained. Obviously, everywhere across the U.S. is constrained by land use conflicts. By the end of 2022, New England claimed 1,550 megawatts of wind, 5,473 megawatts of solar. Most of the solar operate as smaller connected, blah, blah, blah. And then you said a recent study released by the New England ISO, or ISO New England, found that meeting the deep decarbonization policies adopted by Massachusetts and other states, including electrifying transportation and heating sectors, would require 89,900 megawatts of wind, solar, and battery storage. So these are crazy numbers. You add them up from 7 gigawatts total to 90 gigawatts. It can't be done. Why is this not getting more attention? I mean, I've seen these studies by Mark Jacobson and Jesse Jenkins and la, 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 la. Oh, we're going to do it all with renewables. Where do they think this stuff is going to go?
Honestly, I have no idea. In fact, that report, they came out in September 2022, and it's laughable on its face. 89,000 plus megawatts have to be installed, wind, solar, and battery. And, that's... and
it'd have to be done by 2035 or something. I mean, it's just like,
yes.
This is tomorrow for all practical purposes, right?
Yes, exactly. Impossible. But there was a conference call that happened, a Zoom call, where they were explaining that study, where the ISO New England had it. And there were people on that call that really do not even question it. It's like, just the number. I think that people really do not understand what even a 30 megawatt project looks like, let alone a 50 megawatt, 100 megawatt. We don't have anything like what is in Indiana, Illinois, Texas, in terms of projects. So,
but you would need gigawatt scale projects for that to work, to meet that number, to go from from 7 to 90, the ninefold. Well, that's even more than ninefold, 10 to what's my math, 12, 13 fold increase. I mean, these are just insane numbers, but here's the other one. So you also quoted the New England Wind Integration Study that was done in 2010. And it found that to deliver energy to consumers, that they would have to build 4,000 miles of new high voltage transmission in New England at a cost in 2010 dollars of between 19 and $25 billion. I mean, but again, this seems to me there's this conflict, and I've thought about this a lot, between what the policymakers and the modelers and, that what they imagine is possible and then what is actually, potentially can occur in the physical world. I'll ask the question this way, because I've been talking a lot, reading from your things here, but what is this disconnect? I mean, you've been looking at this for a long time, Lisa, that between the theoreticians, I'll put them that way, the policymakers and the theoretical people, do they not turn wrenches? Do they not know anyone in rural America? Why is it that they continue to, I'll say it this way, delude themselves about what is possible with regard to these physical assets or these physical infrastructure? How do you see this disconnect?
I think what is happening when I've watched the environmental movement, because there is a big contingent of environmentalists here in New England, and they firmly believe we need to get off fossil fuel, whatever it's going to take. The cost is not an issue because, we're trying to save the planet. That's their mentality. That's where they're coming from. And they see each turbine installed, each solar panel installed, any battery that's put in place as an incremental win. Okay, so these established mandates that are put in place, I do not believe that they're intended to be reality, but they are used as a hammer on the public utility commissions, the local communities, that we need to meet this policy, and it gets pressed over and over and over again. So I don't believe any of them, any of the environmental folks, any of the policy people believe that we're going to get to 89,000 megawatts of operating wind, solar, and battery. But what they do believe is that you established a law, And whatever it takes to get a project built, it will get built. They'll put pressure on it. And in some cases, it'll be impossible, but the enormous impact on that community that's fighting back, or the costs associated with, trying to get something built that is at least somewhat protective of the environment. Well, it's going to be very difficult to get through the permitting process. And maybe it will fail, but if it wins, it's an incremental win. And that's where they see it. I do not think they take these laws verbatim. I think it's a number that has to be met, and it'll be used as a hammer over and over and over again until a project is built. And that's where we've gotten to that point. It's going to break the system as it is. That the original newest study, the New England Wind Integration Study that ISO New England did, that was just, I believe, for 24% of our generation coming from wind and the kinds of costs. We certainly do not have that today. That's not how much wind we have built, but we're meeting mandates through other technologies, biomass, hydro.
Right.
And we're seeing, for instance, in the state of Massachusetts, they know they can't meet the mandates that they've established. They know it. So they've put in, and they're frantic about it. That's why they're pushing so hard for offshore wind at this point. But they're also pushing very hard for more transmission to bring in hydro from Canada. That is something that the environmental movement fought for years. They do not see hydro as a form of renewables, and certainly not coming in from Canada. So they're having to make concessions and changing their laws, or revamping some of how they're interpreting applying the laws, I should say. But I don't think I don't think they're serious about it, but at the same time, their laws are there staring us in the face.
Right.
So how else to say it? We have to.
And Meredith Engwin has pointed out that these ideas that Hydro-Quebec is going to be able to provide all this power. Well, maybe not actually, because Hydro-Quebec, if they go short, they're going to take care of Hydro-Quebec. They're not going to take care of New England, or if there is a cold snap and they need more power, those aren't firm contracts. But
absolutely. That happened to us. I don't know if you're aware or followed on Christmas Eve this past December. That is exactly what happened. We had a cold snap. Obviously, they were suffering the same cold snap in Connecticut, and Hydro-Quebec they delivered just the minimum amount of generation to meet their obligation. But after that, nothing. And we were on the verge of brownouts. And there's some speculation that one of the reasons we didn't get into brownouts was because the cold weather caused outages. Right. So our demand dropped as a result of outages in New England.
Well, I want to talk about offshore wind, because you mentioned that, and you've been very active in fighting these offshore wind projects, and I've been following them for years. But I want to ask this before we get to that, because you've also written about the conflicts of interest among the groups that are supporting offshore wind. And it's something I've thought about, and I started writing an essay on it. But you mentioned these different NGOs and climate activist groups. I don't call them green groups. I don't call them environmental groups, because they're neither. But here's the question: is environmentalism dead in America?
That is such a good question. That is such a good question. And when it comes to the environmental movement that at one time put all their eggs in one basket, and that is to protect our open spaces, protect our natural environment, protect the wildlife that lives on this planet so that we can coexist with them, that environmental movement is dead. There's no question in my mind. It's been industrialized and commercialized, the movement itself. And now it's all about climate change. And what climate change means for the environmental movement today is energy policy. That's where they stand today. And it's all about renewables and getting off fossil fuel, not going on nuclear. I mean, maybe there might be some concession. You may be tracking that more than I am, but certainly it's all about wind and solar.
Well, that second question was, is it, and this is how I've thought about it, is that environmentalism and that protection of open space, the protection of wildlands, the protection of wildlife, has been replaced by climatism and renewable energy fetishism. And you kind of said that before about any wind project, any solar panel, any battery Does that ring true to you? Climatism and renewable energy fetishism. That's how I see it, right? That environmentalism that was the John Muir kind of that whole, small is beautiful ethos has been replaced by no, let's pave the countryside with wind turbines and solar panels because climate change. So has it been replaced by this renewable energy fetishism? Is that, you said industrialized, was it commercialized, has been industrialized and commercialized energy and talked about energy policy. Does that ring true to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there was a time, I've been involved in this debate for so many years. There was a time in 2006, 7, 8, 9, where we thought that we had a voice with the environmental movement. And, that Sierra Club, Nature Conservancy, they all appeared to be at least making an effort to protect the wildlife from large-scale generation. This would be wind energy built anywhere in rural areas of the United States. And what ended up happening was the wind industry started organizing entities, I guess, or NGOs themselves that were a combination of the renewable energy, the wind industry, really, that was the player all along, and the environmental groups. And they would get together, they all had a seat at the table, and then they would deliberate over how they could get a project built and how they can do it with proper mitigations or avoidance, if they can, avoidance of any environmental harm. And I think that involvement, that they partnered with the wind industry, and that partnership has now gone on for nearly 20 years. And that there's no breaking into it. As far as NRDC is concerned, Sierra Club, Nature Conservancy, they want to be in charge of deciding where projects can be built and have a voice in that process. But they are having to negotiate with a very difficult partner, and that is a partner that wants to get his project built anywhere they can, as quickly as they can, as cheaply as they can.
Right.
And the winner ultimately is the wind industry. So to the extent that the environmentalists are serious about protecting wildlife, either their voice has been silenced or curtailed, or they've just become partners in it.
Well, that is the natural segue to this discussion of whales, because this is the part where, to me, it's just really is gobsmacking how these blithe kind of dismissals of the concerns about the North Atlantic right whale, and that we're up to now over 30 strandings, 30 beachings of whales, and some similar number of dolphins since last December, higher numbers, as I recall, than any other recent time period. And it just happens to coincide with the beginning of this offshore wind energy development, and the near universal response from these big NGOs is, oh, don't blame the wind business. Now, if I were going to do a little experiment, I'm just wondering if we replaced these projects with oil offshore platforms, what would be the change in the rhetoric coming from these NGOs? But it seems to me that this kind of quiet acquiescence, or this don't blame the wind business, is confirmation of what you've just said, that there's no, well, I'll put it this way. Have they been bought? Because you've written about conflicts of interest when it comes to the offshore wind and the whale issues. Yeah. Have these groups been bought off by the wind industry?
We tried really hard. So as part of the Save Our Whales Coalition, which I'm a part of and one of the founders, we investigated where the money might be going. We found certainly direct monies going to the regional NGOs. And so all the states that are directly impacted by offshore wind, you can see where you could follow that money and see where it's going. So the New Jersey Audubon is getting money from the wind industry. The Environmental League of Massachusetts is getting money from the wind industry, again, the offshore wind industry. Trying to find the money trail from offshore wind to the large, the industrial size environmental groups like NRDC. We could not find that because many times they're funded by foundations, but we do know and have had people admit that their decisions around how they're going to advocate, where their advocacy is going to go, is being made by money and by their donors. So if it's not coming directly from the wind industry, it may be going to a foundation that's climate oriented, that
is laundering the money for the. So let me ask about the North Atlantic right whales, which are critically endangered now. Some 370 remaining individual specimens. How big a threat? And look, and this has been debated now many times. A lot of don't blame the construction, don't blame the wind projects. How significant could this, in your view, could these offshore wind developments lead to the extinction of the North Atlantic right whale?
Yes, I think that's where we're headed right now. We have less than 340 actually individual right whales on the planet. And, obviously much smaller population of reproducing females. And where they're developing the wind projects in southern New England waters, although it's not designated as not federally designated as critical habitat, it is now recognized as critical habitat for the North Atlantic right whale. And that's where we're going to put hundreds and hundreds of wind turbines right where they live. That work right now, the Vineyard Wind Project is under construction. And I just want to let you know, while we've had so many whales that have died since December, and it is corresponding directly with offshore wind surveying that's happening in the waters just east of New Jersey and New York, that activity has been ongoing since 2016. And that's one of the areas that Save Right Whales Coalition I'm working on. And many people may not realize, but in 2017 and 2018, NOAA data show that 7 North Atlantic right whales were killed right around Martha's Vineyard. Martha's Vineyard, which is just 14 miles north of where this wind development is happening in southern New England waters, just north of where we looked at the data and see that the wind developer was actually out there doing sonar studies at the same time when these whales were beached. No one is saying that those whales died because of what happened. We cannot say with certainty that the whale, again, 7 North Atlantic right whales died in 2017 and 2018. We can't say with certainty that those whales died as a result of this offshore surveying, but there's no other explanation for why they died. And we're very concerned about that. And so that's part of it. And that, the industry immediately came out. Actually, the industry's been relatively silent on this. It's been BOEM, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, and NOAA, which is the agency responsible for protecting marine life. Both have come out very strongly, along with the state of New Jersey, arguing that these whales their death has nothing to do with offshore wind. And they argue that this is the offshore wind, that the whales have been dying for a long time and their offshore wind surveys just started, right? That's what their argument is. But that's not true. The surveys have been going on since 2016. And so it's very concerning. The public needs the public is unaware and is being, convinced by authorities that there's no problem. And it's scary. I've never seen a situation where there's been such acquiescence on the part of the environmental movement, who will turn around and sue on a dime to protect the North Atlantic right whale, except for now, nothing. They've done everything in their power to protect it against vessel strikes. They want to see speed restrictions put in, and all sorts of other regulations that impose on who? The fishing industry, recreational fishers, and others. But when it comes to offshore wind, dead silence.
It is true. It is shocking and dismaying and depressing and enraging, I would say, even.
But you know what, Robert, can I just say one other thing?
Of course.
We're asking, if this were oil and gas, how would the environmental movement respond? Well, we know how they'll respond because we have a court case. What happened in 2018 and 2019 timeframe, the Trump administration, you may recall, wanted to open the outer continental shelf off the East Coast for oil and gas exploration. And the first step, and one of the first steps in that process, was obviously they're going to be doing the sonar studies, the same kind of sonar studies that are being done now by the industry, wind industry, to map the seabed. And in order to get to that point of beginning that exploration, they had these developers, these oil and gas developers, had to obtain from NOAA what are called incidental harassment authorizations. These are documents or permits that grant the developer permission to harass, if you will, not kill, not permanently harm, but harass, and basically interfere with their life in the water in order to conduct their sonar. Okay, so a number of requests were filed and granted, and you would see this court case. Every single environmentalist on the face of the earth piled on, as did all the states, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, I think Connecticut, Rhode Island, South Carolina, all piled on, filed a lawsuit and demanding an injunction that those incidental harassment authorizations be stopped. And they argued that the impact on marine mammals would be severe, it would be detrimental, it could not go forward because of the noise that's going to be produced. Same noise that we're talking about here, that is produced by the offshore industry. And that injunction was granted. It was granted ultimately.
So one set of rules for oil and gas, a different set of rules for wind.
Exactly.
Even though the structures that they would be building would not exactly the same, but still involve putting steel into the ocean and require sonar and require industrializing the oceans, as Jesse Ausubel puts it, same kind of process, but right. Because it was hydrocarbons, the NGOs sued, and now that it's wind, they're completely silent, and instead they're enraged that the Texas Public Policy Foundation or some other groups would file lawsuits on behalf of the fishermen in the region. Oh, that's not fair somehow. Well, wait a minute, I thought there's one law for everyone here, but apparently there isn't.
There isn't. And, I could take that same lawsuit, if I had the funding, if any of us had the funding, and file exactly the same thing, just to change the defendant in that case. It would be the wind industry. And I doubt I'd get the injunction, okay? I doubt it would fly in the courts. That's where we're at right now.
So why do you care so much, Lisa? I know that, and we talked about Wind Action, which you fund primarily by yourself. It's not even a nonprofit, so you're not claiming an NGO status. Mm-hmm. You, I guess, get some contributions. Well, I'll ask this question: how much of this? How much money do you get from the oil and gas industry?
Actually, we're just totally on a shoestring. There is no funding coming into Wind Action. I am not paid for what I do. This is really
so why do you care though so much? I mean, you've dedicated, I know we've talked for several times in the last few years, and you're very dedicated to these causes and protecting open space, protecting rural landowners from the encroachment of big renewable projects. Why do you care so much?
Well, actually, a colleague of mine asked me, do you feel like you're angry all the time? It's like, that was the other part of it. It's like, you must wake up mad all the time about what's going on. But really, it's just there's so much that's just horrifying about what's happening and how gaslit the public is about this, that I could stop today and just not engage at all. But on some level, this is not self-serving. On some level, I think that if there's any way that I could help people get their voices heard, or help people formulate their arguments, or get the data, or whatever it takes to bring forward the issues, that's what drives me totally. I mean, it's challenging. Personally, it's very challenging. It's like probably, and that I don't know if I've ever mentioned this to you. My husband and I had a software company for many years, and we ended up selling it. And I've worked in software industry for years. But this topic is the most challenging I've ever engaged in. And it just keeps me going.
And you mentioned your husband. We haven't talked about that. How does your family feel about this? How do they see? Do you think, oh, your mom, your kid? I know you have children. Did they say, oh, mom, why do you care so much? I mean, I make a pretty good living doing what I'm doing. I give a lot of public speeches, and I do okay. How does your family feel about what you do?
Well, I mean, I guess they accept that I'm just a little bit of an activist, and They accept her. I mean, they grew up with it. My kids grew up with me being this way. So hopefully, I mean, they've benefited to some extent. They've learned how to investigate. They've learned how to analyze, I think, by watching what I do. My husband, he's extremely tolerant. He gets upset. I mean, he does not like what's happening, but he does not engage with it at all at this point. So
what is this happening? You said that what is happening, I guess how I would describe it is this kind of climate corporatism, right? That there is you mentioned this, that these NGOs, these climate activist groups, that they've been co-opted, I'll use that word, by big money, right? But that is this, I mean, if you were going to describe what is the big picture here? I put it this way, that this is really a battle between big business, big banks, and big law firms against small town America. But it's in terms of a lot of these wind and solar projects. And I've written about it. Christiana, Wisconsin. I was there a few weeks ago talking with local people. There's the possibility of covering 7 square miles of prime Wisconsin farmland with solar. And these people are saying, no, we don't want this in our neighborhood. Are you kidding me? This would kill our little town. But is it that stark? Is it that, I mean, how do you see because this isn't the narrative that we're seeing in the New York Times, but it's the one that I see as the one that is really at work here. I'll put it. Am I seeing this correctly? That this is some kind of corporatism against small town America and even the American electric ratepayer? How do you see it?
Well, okay. So for many years, I saw it that way too. I mean, it was the attitude towards the general public regarding rural America was like, okay, I mean, you talk to people that live in Boston, and they would feel threatened to come to live where I live. And it's pretty rural, very rural area. And it can be scary. They see all the people in rural America as gun-toting crazies, right? And that obviously that's not the case. There are a lot of amazing people that I live with. And I didn't live here my whole life. I didn't grow up. I grew up in Connecticut. But so basically the public at large may see people in rural America as just like, it's just open space. They just see the open space out there, and that's a good place to put all these power plants. They don't care. They don't notice that people live there. And if the people live there, they have their little narrative that says, well, they'll all benefit by the economic opportunities. Look at how many jobs wind brings and all the property taxes and all these benefits that are coming in. So they don't see, and I don't think they'll ever recognize unless they had a second home in an area like in a rural area, and they'll see what the impacts are. But where things changed for me was when the offshore wind development came about. And here now, you're not dealing with rural America anymore. You're dealing with second homeowners that have views of the ocean, that are many of them very wealthy. Many, if they're not wealthy, if they're not the second homeowners, there are communities that are making their entire year's revenue coming from the tourism that happens in New Jersey for the summertime, or Nantucket Island, or Martha's Vineyard.
Right.
And a serious amount of money going to these areas. You can categorize them as rural in some sense. They are, but that the very wealthy, now you have very wealthy people, very competent people, competent in that they know how to articulate and fight, and which may be.
And they can afford to hire lawyers, and they have the deeper pockets. And so, but what does that change though? You're getting to, I'm sorry.
What changed then was the industry. I have never seen the wind industry or its acolytes become so vicious like what I've seen this go around with the offshore wind. When we're seeing it, literally, there's a report that came out of Brown University, right? In a revered university in this country. They put out a report a few months ago, and the whole focus of that report was attacking a citizens group that is trying to raise awareness in Rhode Island about one of the offshore wind projects. And the attack was going after individual citizens in this report. And who did that? Well, there's a professor there. And he sicked his students. He weaponized his students against people that live in Rhode Island or have homes in Rhode Island that will be looking over and watching these projects. And that I don't know if that was funded through a grant or whatever, but But so by and large, I think what happens in rural America is it's just the people are dismissed. We need the land, we're going to build there, and we'll dismiss the public. And if they complain, well, they'll get money. They'll have the property taxes and all the jobs that come. In this case, they can't tease people with money. They can't tease them with jobs. What they're doing now is attacking people in the most vicious way. And is this
the Climate and Development Lab Institute at Brown?
Yes, it is.
Discourses of Climate Delay and the Campaign Against Offshore Wind, a case study from Rhode Island.
There you go. That's it. And then not only that, there's a local newspapers too that are, I think it's Eco Rhode Island, Eco RI, where they've come out and they've named people by name. They've put out their addresses. Like why? And these are the people
we find arguments made by local anti-offshore wind groups reflect those advanced in national climate misinformation campaigns. So they're somehow conflating opposition to offshore wind with climate disinformation, as opposed to whether there is some well, let me see, here's fake experts. I see this whole well, but this is
what these people are doing is raising questions about what's going on, and rightfully so. But that's where we're at. So that it's not a rural urban divide in this case. It's much. I think that their arguments are falling apart at this point. I think they've trotted
out this thing that Cesar Rodney Institute, that they got some money once from some hydrocarbon company, and therefore that's it. But I even see them. Well, they're using Megan Lapp, who is in the fishing industry, and somehow the fact that she appeared on Tucker Carlson is somehow wrong.
That guilt by association, that is a typical tactic.
And then Michael Schellenberger is, that he's named in this as well. But it is remarkable that there's what about, I'm young enough to remember Save the Whales, right? And if I were going to be cute about it, was like Save the Gay Baby Whales for Jesus, right? That was kind of in the 70s or 80s, it was kind of the parody, right? That we're going to save the gay baby whales for Jesus, right? That there were some, that was the way you would parody the NGO, the environmental movement more generally. But in this case, the environmental movement, what was the environmental movement, is completely silent when it comes to actually protecting the whales. And I think
silent. I'm sorry. In this case, though, when it's certainly silent about protecting the whales, but they have no problem turning their attack on on residents. You're either with us or you're against the planet. You're with us or you're against you're a climate denier.
Right. And that was what Michael Schellenberger wrote about it. He called it the environmental betrayal, I think. And that, although it's not exactly the right wording for it. It's just somehow but I don't know what the exact right word is. But we've been talking for about an hour. My guest again is Lisa Linowes. She is the executive director and founder of windaction.org. She's also the author of a recent report for the Fiscal Alliance Foundation, which you can read at fiscalalliancefoundation.org. The new report is called High Impact: How Massachusetts Energy Policy is Raising Electricity Rates. We've talked about that report. We've been talking about whales. And I've only seen whales once. I was in the Galapagos, and it was one of the most remarkable. I was in a small Zodiac, and we were touring around the Galapagos, and it was amazing. And I was gobsmacked, as the Brits would say. And I was with my family, my wife and my kids, and how big those whales were. And I don't know what kind of whale it was, but I was just stunned by the scale of the animal. I mean, it was just enormous. And I thought, man, we're in this tiny little boat where we all had life jackets on, and I'm a pretty good swimmer, but I was like, damn, if this thing just even bumps us, we're all taking a swim. And it was one of the more remarkable experiences I've ever had with wildlife, right? Just amazed at how big these animals are. And yet there's this kind of, as you say, and we've been discussing, oh, well, this, climate change, therefore don't worry about the whales. Whereas if this had been some other industry besides wind, there would be an entirely different response, I think is fair to say. But I want to draw this to a close, Lisa, because we've been talking now for more than an hour. I always ask these questions of my guests. What books are you reading? I know you're busy. You have a lot of things, but you a fiction reader, nonfiction reader? What's on the top of your pile?
Totally nonfiction. It's all about court cases and reports on noise.
No
marine noise.
No Tom Clancy, no thriller novels, no. So what nonfiction then? What are you reading? Are these books? Are these reports and more technical
these
stuff?
are report, right. I wish, so many people get into Audible and I listen to their books. I can't, I find it very distracting at this point. I'm totally focused on what we're working on here with regard to offshore wind.
What gives you hope?
Right now, oh man, I'm a little depressed right now. So I hate to end it with a sour note, but I don't have a lot of hope right now. I'm seeing things barreling so fast. And I guess if I had to say anything, I'm watching the people in New Jersey that are stepping up and in arguing regarding the offshore wind stuff and development. And they are single focused. I mean, I used to think the New Yorkers that when I worked with them with the onshore wind development were tough and focused and able, and they absolutely were. New Jersey and offshore wind debate, their lives will turn upside down, will end as they know it if those projects get built, in terms of the fact that many work in tourism, many people, have second homes out there. And they make a living by the ocean. And so they're fighting hard, and that's inspiring.
Well, and the Government Accountability Office has opened an investigation, I understand, as well, on these whale deaths as well. So that is something. I mean, I saw that and I thought, well, now that's interesting. And I think that was requested by a New Jersey congressman, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I hope a GAO study could take years and years. So
right.
I think what ultimately has to happen is Congress has to put some pressure on NOAA, and particularly BOEM, Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. Because I just want to comment really quickly, if I can, there is each of the states have an obligation or at least a voice in these projects that are being built, even though they're not being built in state waters. And they have to identify whether or not the project, that development that's happening off their shores, is consistent with what the desires are, or the businesses and livelihood that happens within their state. And when Rhode Island went through its consistency review, their staff, this involves a wind project called Revolution Wind, which is the same project that the people in Rhode Island that were the subject of that Brown University study are fighting. That staff report was very negative about the offshore wind development. They said that it is going to have a long-term adverse and cumulative impact, adverse incremental and overall cumulative impact on the fishing industry and all industry up and downstream from that, and could permanently put fishermen out of business and risk their lives because they're not going to be able to safely fish within the area if the fish remain, because that's also an open question. So despite that finding by the staff, by this would be the Coastal Resource Management Council, which is part of the state of Rhode Island, the project was approved. And that's what the project rather was found to be consistent with the state's requirements over offshore development. And that's what's very frustrating, because that decision could only have been made because it was made with a political bent.
Right.
The thumb was put on the scale in favor of this project. We have a horrible staff report. It's a good staff report, but it's horrible with regard to the impacts of that project. And yet they're pushing it through. And I'm in an arena, and all of us are in an arena that we don't recognize. So it's difficult.
Well, I was hoping to end on a hopeful note, because I asked what gives you hope, but we're ending instead on a somewhat somber and I suppose maybe just a realistic note that yes, things have what environmental protection, as it has been known for many decades, has ceased to exist, I think, by the large NGOs. And that is a deeply unfortunate situation. My guest has been Lisa Linowes. You can find her on Twitter, at Linowes Lisa. You can find her report on the Fiscal Alliance Foundation website, fiscalalliancefoundation.org. She's also on windaction.org. She's not hard to find on the interweb. So, Lisa, thank you for coming on the Power Hungry podcast. Great to see you, and keep up the good work.
Thanks, Robert. I appreciate it.
And all of you in podcast land, tune in for the next episode of the Power Hungry podcast. If you're on a podcast thing and you want to give us a few stars, then do that. And follow me on Substack too, robertbryce.substack.com. Until next time, see ya.